Kris still cannot be Chara. This video is a part 2. I will reference things from the first video, clarify things, and assume you have seen it. Make sure to slap on that bad boy before this, otherwise you will be lost at points, or will question things I addressed previously. I considered waiting until chapter 3 and 4 before making a follow-up, but then I realized how much good evidence I left out of the first video and came to one huge knife-related revelation. Stay till the end for a bonus crack theory about a certain beloved hoodie-wearing skeleton. There is one phrasing thing I'd like to take back in the last video. I said a couple times that Chara intended to genocide humanity when they obtained the souls with Azrael. I think this is too hyperbolic. I don't really think they wanted to kill literally everyone. They definitely wanted revenge for how they were treated, shown by how driven to kill people they were when combined with Azrael, but it's unlikely that they would have killed as much as possible. Not impossible that they wanted to, but unlikely. Even if they tried to, I think Azrael wouldn't have allowed it. I don't even think I thought this when I made the video. I just used genocide as an extreme term. I do highly doubt Chara at that point would have stopped at 6 though. Not because they're pure evil or anything. I'm not in that camp. I'm more in the camp that they're very mentally unwell. They were most likely abused and are too young to hold accountable for some of the things they did. To clarify, I absolutely stand by everything I said in that segment. I would just replace hyperbolic words like genocide with more tame words such as killing. The last thing I need to address from part 1 is the biology thing. Some people on my last video commented things along the lines of,
Peter Parker is biologically a different person between films, but they're still Peter Parker.
I'm not saying this character isn't this character, therefore no characters can ever be represented differently in any piece of media ever unless the actors are identical twins. I'm saying that the Deltarune and Undertale universes work in such a way where all of the characters are biologically the same people between games. Therefore biology is the foundation for the possibility of who Kris is, and everything else is on top of that. Let's say we have a manhole covering. It being biologically possible is that manhole covering. Same is true for them being Frisk, a Frisk-Chara combo, or even the Cyan Soul. For Chara, it is not biologically possible, meaning there is no manhole covering. This means any evidence we can place here will fall into the sewer and be flushed away. It may seem hypocritical that in my last video I say Kris liking chocolate doesn't really matter that much, but Kris loving pie does link them to Frisk. However, the pie point is on top of the biological foundation, whereas the chocolate point falls into the sewer and is flushed away. Anyway, that's enough preamble. Get your tummies tickled, and let's smash into this. One thing I had to concede on in my last video is that Kris and Chara both like knives. This is undeniably a link between the two that... Wait.
Yes! Hell yeah! Hey, come on, baby! Come on! Yes! Come on! Ah!
Yes. This whole time Chara Kris truthers have used this knife as key evidence. It's always been the one thing I've struggled to counter.
I just couldn't prove it.
I never even thought to look into it because of how Chara has been turned into the knife character by the fandom. I am so unbelievably happy right now, I'm sure you can hear it in my voice. I was absolutely giddy when I came to this realization. Knives, the main thing people say is exclusively a Chara trait, was a gift from the Dreamers. There is literally zero evidence pointing towards them having any affiliation with knives before they met this family. The other Chara knife content in the game is the line of dialogue in Genocide, and that's when they were reincarnated as a bloodthirsty demon. And with Kris, Toriel and Asgore adopted them from a young age. I definitely don't think they came pre-packaged with a shank. I'll assume Toriel was not the one to get them this. It was probably Azrael, judging from its placement near the locket that either Azzy or Chara must have got the other. Although Asgore giving a human child a knife like this is funny and in character, and it would explain Toriel's reaction to the knife in chapter 2, which gives similar annoyance vibes to how she looks at his flowers. Also, the bio of the worn dagger in Undertale says perfect for cutting plants and vines. So maybe Asgore sparked their interest in knives through making them help him garden. Now I'm not saying Kris and Chara don't enjoy these knives, but saying Kris is Chara because of this is stupid. If in one universe I give a kid a shovel and they end up being passionate about shovels, that does not make them the alternate universe equivalent of a biologically different kid that was given a shovel by an alternate universe variant of me. I sound absolutely insane right now, but if you are someone who has said Kris is Chara because of the knives thing, that is exactly what you said. The knife thing is no longer valid proof that Kris is Chara. It clearly being a gift from the Dreamers plus the Cyan Soul's connection to knives is enough for this point to no longer be valid. Knives do not make Kris Chara. Moving on. Chara's love for power is not present in Kris at all. Chara clearly liked the idea of having immense power. Their favorite number is the highest number, and they wanted to combine with Azrael, take 6 souls, and gain ultimate power. The demon reincarnation of Chara, while not being entirely fair to compare to their human version, is still an exaggerated version of their worst traits. This demon's one goal is gaining total power, which they do if the genocide run is completed. This want for power straight up is not a part of Kris's personality at all. Chara cannot save and load in the underground, shown by them actually straight up dying. Kris can save and load, or at least they can with the influence of the controller of the soul. Although they do have a save before we overwrite it, whatever that means. Chara is never stated to have determination, unlike Kris, who is so determined that they can create a dark fountain without a soul in their body. Dark fountains are already stated to require determination to make, so this is incredible determination on Kris's part. Chara has self-harming tendencies that we never see from Kris, or are even remotely suggested. They tried to kill themselves at Mount Ebott, and their plan with Azrael involved them willingly poisoning themselves. Kris definitely has their own issues right now and is going through some things, but they do not have these tendencies. If we make Kris try and electrocute Noelle, Noelle will do it back. Noelle notes that Kris seems emotionally hurt by this, and not physically. We know this as they don't take any damage. This shows that Kris is against pranks that actually harm people, unlike Chara, who poisons Asgore and laughs about it. I understand that some people disagree that Chara poisoned Asgore on purpose, and that's fine. This is entirely subjective. Toby Fox is somewhat willing to clarify things people say that he considers wrong, so him never confirming this either way clearly shows he wants to keep this interpretable. I personally believe they poisoned Asgore on purpose to test the Buttercups. I believe this based on them laughing, the Buttercups being a central part of their plan later, and them telling Azzy to turn the camera off when he mentions the flowers. Chara was a beloved member of the underground whose presence filled the place with hope, whereas I wouldn't exactly describe Kris as that. Chara was considered a golden them in a similar way to how Azrael is considered a golden boy, whereas Kris is the golden boy's weird younger sibling. Everyone is nice to them, because hometown is just a pretty nice place, but they are kind of considered to be strange. In Undertale, Azrael and Chara have a heart-shaped friendship locket. The heart-shaped friendship locket is vaguely referenced in Deltarune, but Kris and Azrael do not have one. Spamton references a heart on a chain in his boss fight and has his own sweepstakes locket, which is also a clear reference. I'll be honest, I kind of just view this locket as a joke, with the 1997 on it, as well as the Spamton inside. I struggle to take this as too much of a serious lore thing. Don't get me wrong, it's undeniably a reference, but I'm just not sure there's much I can read into it. This links to a story about Kris and Noelle which may have some meaning, but those two don't have a friendship locket in-game either. Even if they did, I'd be willing to bet Noelle would have been the one to make her buy it, and not Kris, as she is established to be creative and make things like the doll in the hospital room. So it's not a reason to think Kris is Chara. I feel this locket is more of an essential Chara item than the knife is, but despite Spamton referencing it, it's just not here in-game at all. If it's supposed to say anything about Noelle and Kris's relationship, which it very well may do, I don't view Azrael as Noelle and I don't view Chara as Kris, so it doesn't really move the needle in this discussion. This would just be a parallel to me, but an interesting one for sure. Spamton does just make references to seemingly unrelated things, and I don't expect all of them to have answers. We know he has a past with Noelle's internet and technology usage, so if I had to guess, I would say this locket is a corrupted Spamton version of the type of jewelry or lockets she showed interest in. The story link actually has something that potentially connects Kris to Frisk further, but we'll discuss that later. I mentioned the chocolate thing earlier in the video, and whilst I'm not going to completely disregard this point, it's super weak. Chara just likes chocolate, there's no meaning to it. Whereas Kris's particular liking for chocolate comes from their emotional connection to Azrael and nostalgia for spending time with him. Also, the Dreamers are just a family that treat their kids often. Also around 90% of people like chocolate, so it would be more weird if Kris didn't like chocolate. Also if you're saying this is proof for Kris being Chara, there are like so many Frisk item related things that could link them that are probably stronger than that. Chara convinces Azrael to do a pretty complicated plan in Undertale among other things. This would mean they are quite the talker and have their way with language. Whilst not entirely fair to compare to their human form, Demon Chara is quite the yapper also. Kris on the other hand is known for being very quiet, and their dialogue options, especially the ones that they're more likely to say in character, are usually pretty short, kind of like another little munchkin we all know. Speaking of, When it comes to dialogue, Kris is much more like what we see of Frisk than what we know of Chara. Like I said in my last video, they both have a cheeky side to them and are both known for being mostly quiet. In part 1 I said that Kris's Dark World outfit matches Frisk's colors, especially the scarf. This is truer to their personality than the Dreamer outfits, as the Dark World appearances of characters tend to reflect what they think is cool. I missed some important evidence for this. Kris's Castletown closet says, "You can wear whatever you want." This text makes me think that these clothes are probably the only clothes Toriel makes or buys for Kris and Azriel, and further shows that this is the color scheme they identify with more. Kris's room also just matches the Frisk color palette, which is something I can't believe I forgot in the last video. Whilst there is some discussion to be had about how much Ralsei actually understands what Kris wants, Susie was pretty happy with her room, so I believe Kris's room appeals to them too. This point has been really solidified for me now. The Spampton locket thing I mentioned earlier links to a story about Kris and Noelle. The song attached to this is called Pian, which is piano with a letter removed, exactly like how Kris is Frisk with a letter removed. Removing the letter from the name and song also both makes them anagrams, Kris being risk and Pian being pain. I'm not sure what the meanings of these anagrams are yet, but the nature of the Pian and Kris thing definitely further enforces Kris being Frisk. A key attribute of Frisk is their determination, being so determined they overpowered Flowey's ability to save, a being literally made of determination. I already went over how determined Kris is, so if they were thrown in Undertale's underground, their determination is most likely strong enough to overpower Flowey's like Frisk. Frisk and Kris can both save and reload time, something we can definitely assume Chara could not based on the fact they died permanently. Regardless of what you think of Chara's morality, they definitely are not a pacifist. No matter how noble you do or don't think their goal to obtain the 6 souls with Azriel was, at the end of the day they were still going to kill 6 people. Frisk on the other hand is clearly a pacifist at heart. They only show happiness and smiling when pacifistic acts happen. In the worst route in the game, they are inarguably possessed by a demon and not fully acting on their own accord. There is nothing to show that they enjoy this particularly. Kris so far in the game does not benefit or seem happy with any of the negative choices made, much like Frisk. If you disagree that Frisk is a pacifist at heart, the mirror text acknowledges Frisk less and less based on how violent you are, which is a good sign of their core as a person. In the Undertale Xbox One dialogue, Sans says Monster Kid and Noelle were opening presents together with Noelle's big sister. This further enforces that Frisk, Monster Kid, and Susie being aged up alongside each other makes sense, as we can now throw in Noelle with that as well. Now the timeline thing is weird and debatable because of Azriel, but it still lines up with Frisk more than Chara from a timeline perspective, and it makes so much more sense from a story perspective. There's like one discrepancy, but you can still probably explain it, whereas there are way more with it being a Chara timeline. Plus it wouldn't make any sense from a character perspective, as mentioned in the last video. Frisk's relationship to humans lines up more with Kris's than Chara's does. Chara is said to actively hate humanity, to a degree they were willing to kill themselves just to initiate a war against them. Kris, however, seems to just be more comfortable with the monsters, and is just scared or uncomfortable around humanity. From the fact that Frisk has full health at the start of Undertale, it is unlikely that they tried to kill themselves, leading me to believe they were just trying to escape their life with the humans. They don't seem to have the same hatred for humanity, but were definitely also abused by them. The bandage saying it has been used many times indicates physical abuse from wherever they came from. They are more comfortable with monsters due to this, like Kris, as can be seen from them happily living with Toriel at the end. Even if they don't stay with Toriel specifically, we have more reason to assume they stayed around the monsters than go back to the humans. Kris does not have the same hatred for humanity that Chara has, and therefore their more complicated relationship with them aligns with Frisk more than Chara. When they close this book, it's not showing hatred or aggression, it's clearly discomfort or fear. This is a similar reaction to when you try to look in Azriel's cyber world room or read through Asgore's police history. The Noelle electrocution moment is another reason Kris's cheekier pranks tend to line up with Frisk's more so than Chara's tricks. I still stand by the fact that Chara doesn't do anything that could really be considered a prank. This comparison to Kris seems entirely based on fanon. Frisk and Kris are both susceptible to possession. It's agreed at this point that Kris is possessed and the controller of the Red Soul is a separate entity. However, with Frisk it's a bit more complicated. Some people think they're always possessed, and some people think the soul control is theirs, and the only possession they encounter is Chara in Genocide. I'm not interested in this discussion, so I'm just going to say that we should all at least be able to agree that Frisk and Kris are susceptible to possession, and we have no reason to think Chara is or ever has been. Kris is ambidextrous, and Frisk probably also is. There is evidence of both of these characters switching hands at points for different things. I'm not going to go into the details as that would require dozens of minutes of sprite analysis, but although both do show preferences for different hands at different points, they don't fully stick to one hand or the other for the entirety of either game. Toriel's full pies are too big for Frisk in Undertale despite Frisk being able to eat the slices. Kris is now big enough to devour the whole pie and gladly does so. This is just peak development, guys. Solid inarguable evidence for Kris Chara. 1. They both like chocolate. This is a weak point, but I'll concede. 3. Chara and Kris's names start with a K sound. All of this evidence flushes away as it's biologically impossible for Kris to be Chara.
Oh no, look, it's all broken and on the floor.
This isn't even considering all the evidence against it, which just shoots Kris Chara into the realm of not being possible even further. Just to be cheeky, I'm going to use some Sans Kris evidence points. 1. Kris and Sans both prank people. 2. Kris and Sans have both put ketchup on their body and pretended it's blood. 3. Kris and Sans are both known for entering weird doors with flames underneath. 4. Their names both end with an S sound. I think these points are as strong as the Chara ones. But just like Chara, all this evidence falls into the sewer, because it's biologically impossible. There's no point drawing a line between these two options, when both are impossible. There's no point drawing a line between these two options, when both are a 0% chance following the game's established rules. I'm not going to restate my evidence that Kris is Frisk, that Kris is a different entity, or that Kris is the Cyan Soul, as I would just be repeating myself. Let's just say, evidence that Kris is any of these options. 1. Literally everything else, plus it's on the foundation of it being biologically possible, unlike Chara and Sans. It is pretty clear that there's by far the most evidence for Frisk, hence why I kind of assume Frisk is Kris until proven otherwise. That said, one of the other options is definitely possible. If Kris is Frisk, it'll likely never be revealed or acknowledged in any significant way. It'll just be how it is, as it isn't directly relevant to the story. Whether Frisk is Kris or not, for the purposes of the story, Kris is Kris. Whether Kris is Deltarune's Frisk or not, they're still their own character. I can say myself that out of the KFC, Kris is definitely my favorite. Me thinking they're Deltarune's Frisk doesn't affect that. Some people take it like an attack on the character when you say Kris is potentially Deltarune's Frisk, which is unnecessarily reactionary. Alternate reality versions of characters are still different characters. I mean, Azrael is probably the most obvious example. We haven't met him in Deltarune yet, but no matter what, just from his age and difference in life experience, it's safe to say he'll probably be more developed and changed a person from Undertale to Deltarune than Frisk is to Kris. My general opinion on Chara being Kris is that all of the parallels are obvious bait, surface level things that fall apart upon thought, straight up misinformation, and fanon Chara traits that people project onto Kris. Pretty much every potential arguable Chara parallel we're given was right before the big fake out at the end of Chapter 1. Chapter 2 didn't give us anything, it just gave us more reason not to think Kris is Chara. This has led me to believe that all of the Chara parallels in Deltarune were mainly for this fake out, and it worked. Most Undertale players playing Deltarune Chapter 1 for the first time went, "Oh my god, Kris is Chara," or "Oh my god, Kris is possessed by Chara." Toby got us, Toby baited us, but it's time to move past it. It's the Sans Remembers resets of Deltarune. I'm not placing any bets on any of the other options, but I will say right now, if I'm wrong about Kris not being Chara, I promise you all I will make a public Logan Paul style apology video. Okay guys, now it's time. Keep in mind when I say this that I am not using this as evidence for Kris being Frisk, it's just something I thought about. I don't expect it to be taken seriously. Okay, so we all know the Sans Deltarune went to Undertale theory, right? Because of this evidence on screen. I'm assuming if you're watching this video you've heard of that. Well, I'm using that theory to build this theory on. If that theory is wrong, this will be too, but oh well. Basically, I think if Sans Undertale is Sans Deltarune, Frisk being Kris could add more layers to Sans's character in Undertale, especially when it comes to his relationship with Toriel and Frisk. Him telling knock-knock jokes on a random door and beginning a friendship with Toriel makes more sense if he has an understanding of who she is already. It also makes him taking pacifist Frisk under his wing a bit more multi-layered than just the promise he made to Toriel. He says if it weren't for the promise he'd have killed you immediately, which I've personally never believed. It would be especially weird for him to do that if he came from the Deltarune world. Going by this theory, he protects you due to him recognizing Frisk as a younger Kris. Obviously, if you kill Papyrus, he'll quickly switch up and realize you're a nasty little freak. But even then, some of his genocide dialogue reflects this idea. In the fight with Sans at the end of Genocide, he says, "I know your type, you're very determined, aren't you?" Who could he be referring to here? Flowey maybe? Judging from the fact that Flowey and Sans are both alive, I highly doubt they have interacted in the genocide route, as that would result in one of their deaths, probably Flowey's. The only other notably determined entities that leaves in Deltarune and Undertale is Kris and the Roaring Knight. I think it's more likely that Sans would be referring to Kris than the Roaring Knight here personally. You could counter this by saying that Sans has some weird dialogue in Deltarune which may suggest he's interacted with Frisk in Undertale before Kris. But judging from the fact that he's definitely aware Frisk is a time traveler in Undertale, I think it's fair to consider he knows Kris or the Red Soul is a time traveler when he lived in Deltarune before. Therefore he assumes he may have already had these conversations before, which would make all of the dialogue options he has in Deltarune make sense. It also would explain why he believes in time travel to begin with. Also in Undertale, Sans has no disdain for humans unlike the other characters, which makes sense if he's had normal or pleasant interactions with humans such as Kris. It also makes the dialogue where he's talking about how there's a glimmer of a good person inside Genocide Frisk make even more sense. When he says Frisk may have even been a friend in another time, this could both be referring to how Sans is friends with Frisk in True Pacifist, as well as how Sans used to be on at least decent terms with Kris in Deltarune's universe. This is backed up by the fact that, although it's recommended to play Pacifist first as Genocide spoils reveals made in Pacifist and treats them like nothing, Frisk can technically go through a Genocide first and then never do any of the other routes. In this case, what possible friendship is Sans referring to here? It never existed. He can't have the repeat playthrough deja vu that he and some of the other characters get in other parts of the game. Therefore it's possible in this scenario where you play Genocide first. When he says this, he can only be referring to his experience with Kris. It would also explain why he feels the need to send Frisk to his basement and let them see the photo, if Kris is in the photo especially. This photo is quite clearly extremely unusual. It's one of, if not the only time I can remember the flavor text being surprised. This is super speculation based and is by far the most headcanon thing I've mentioned in either of these videos, but I thought about it in the bath and it was just too juicy to leave out. After I wrote this I thought, oh, but didn't Sans only recognize Toriel from her voice at the end of True Pacifist? I guess that breaks this possibility. Then I rewatched the scene. Oh wow, he's obviously just straight up lying, lol. He knows exactly who Toriel is. Even ignoring this theory, I still think he's lying here. Like I said, this isn't a theory I'd go to bat for, but it's just something I thought of. Anyways, thanks for watching this video, guys. If you could get this video to 1 3/4 likes, it would mean a lot. Thanks to this article which helped give me some ideas when I was writing this part too. And also thank you to u/silverart3643 on Reddit, who gave me 2 thumbnails way better than the ones I was originally going to use. I basically failed digital design at college, lol. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to leave a comment, and if you didn't, feel free to pay the mafia to put out a hit on me. I definitely have it coming.